It's windy. I normally do 3. You know, there's a scripture that says, there is none good, no, not one. There is none good, no, not one. And Paul the Apostle will quote that, I believe, in his letter to the Romans, which is the same letter that most pastors, churches, and Christians will use, because that's the same letter that Paul discusses those in authority. And there is no authority given except that it's given by God. And that causes a lot of pastors and Christians to hold a view that because Paul talked about authorities that are ordained of God, they actually hold a view that contradicts what Paul said in the other portion of Romans, which there is none good, no, not one. Meaning, though we live in a society where we have human government, God permits those in authority to be in authority. Yet at the same time, none of them are good. Or all of them, those that are on the street, those that are in the churches, those that are all actually not good. But they have the potential of crime, sin, corruption, just like anybody else has that potential. And so there's a balance. I like that song from 7 Mary 3. I got to get out of the wind. Look, I think homeless guys can't copy it. But it says there's this balance. Cumbersome. Balance. I could actually give you statistics that could place Corpus Christi as possibly the most criminal and corrupt department in the world. Oh, that's going overboard. A study came out a few years ago, and these studies they tried to suppress. They talked about professions, not just crime in general, but professions, house painters, fast food workers, so forth, that had the highest crime rate in the area of sexual assault particularly than any other profession. That study said it was law enforcement. Now, obviously, they wanted to hide that. But there was an analysis done. This came out on one of the news sites a few years ago. But they said there was a reason for that. They said because all other professions, fast food workers or whatever, none of them had the capability maybe to pull people over, to hold them, to stop them on the side of the road, except law enforcement had that capability. And that led, more than likely, to that statistic. Okay? This was a study that came out a few years ago. So you could understand that. If you had fast food workers or whatever other profession, now I'm not talking criminals, that's not a profession. And so that's kind of what they thought, that there was more of temptation or ability to commit crime because you are actually in charge of crime reporting. And if you actually have the goal to tell citizens the way you report crimes that you want to report by officers in our community is you make a complaint, and then we look at that. That's what was told me on the last video I mentioned, which that did happen. Now, think of this for a moment. Just I think of these things. I have some friends that are involved in pasts of crime. I've had friends that told me, you know, John, sometimes in our lives in the past, some of our people sometimes, they actually have to commit a murder just in general. Maybe there's a hit from one gang to another gang. And they know ahead of time that if they're going to carry out that act, they're going to go to prison and they're going to do a certain amount of time. And the friend said, I would never do that, John. I said, because that's stupid to do, and I agree. But in some of those cases when murder is carried out, some of those cases, those that commit that act admit it. It was done in public, and they did it with knowing, I'm not going to say nothing. I'm not going to say why I committed it, the history of mafia hits, and they know they're going to do time. I don't know of one case of a law enforcement shooting and killing. The ones that later came out and were shown that these were actually criminal killings. There were some where officers in the history of this country targeted their wives that later came out as true criminal hits. You know, they targeted them to kill them. I know of not one where the officers ever came out and said, yes, police, or I shot into that car, but I'm going to be honest, I jumped the gun. Go ahead and I'll go ahead and be responsible for that killing or that crime. I know of not one. Some later were judged to be, justifiable, but I'm talking about the ones that later on a video came out or something, and you could see that the cop lied and said the perp had a gun or whatever. And those aren't, I don't know of a single one where law enforcement ever admitted it. Yet I do know of some on the streets that did it, and they did it with knowing they were going to admit it. In that particular dynamic, you see more righteousness in the admission of that crime within criminals themselves than in some of the cases where law enforcement did it. Because I know of not a single one nationally where they came out and said, wait a minute, I did wrong. They usually lie. The videos come out, something else happens. So remember, there's none good, no, not one. That's God's word, included in the same letter, Romans, where it says you respect those in authority. So there's this balance between the cross, there's the arrow and the cross, cumbersome. There's this balance. How would you think that it's possible that Corpus Christi might be the most corrupt in the world? Okay. Now, you have corrupt societies. Egypt was under Hosni Mubarak, was known, his cops, security forces, were very abusive. That was a big complaint in Egypt. It still goes on till this day under El-Sisi, who Trump is kind of butting up with. But our country is a blessed country. And because we have about 360 million people, big country, we have the most law enforcement than any other particular country, if I'm remembering correct. So, because of the other study I gave you, that there was actually more particular crimes in the profession of law enforcement than in any other profession, then you would say you would have the most criminal activity in that degree, which I'll admit is a small percentage, but in that particular profession, the most of the work in the United States of America. Now you have various cities and counties throughout the United States. Counties where I grew up, areas of New York City where the mafia has a very big, history. Where you have the corruption within departments and various. The one that was ranked number 2 in the U.S., I gave you that before, was Nueces County for corruption. Of course, Corpus Christi is the biggest city within Nueces County. So out of the largest country in the world that has law enforcement within it, therefore the ranking of those that are within law enforcement, you have more Maybe not as a percentage-wise as like I just explained Egypt, but because of the way our country has prospered in the West. But you do have more law enforcement in the U.S. than you do in Egypt. And so you would look then at where are the areas that are ranked most corrupt. Number 2 is us. And even recently, if you didn't believe the study I just quoted, which was 5 years ago, even recently, the local news actually showed that. Because out of all the ICE raids that were going after gangs, particularly across the U.S., 10% of those raids nationwide were in Corpus Christi, in Nueces County. You had 160 out of Corpus Christi and about 50 out of Houston, which even has a much greater population. So if you looked at that, you could actually make the case that the most corrupt one in law enforcement, if you were looking at these, could possibly be the city of Corpus Christi. Now, what about all the new rookies and girls and younger ones? They're all good people. But this is more of that went on for a long time. Did they ever cover up for sexual assault on kids among their own members? Yes, I'll give you the case. I read statistics. There was an officer, he was a black cop. His name was McChester. And they were doing security at some of the local schools. And that officer started a sexual relationship with the girl that was a minor. There was other cops that worked with him. So they knew. I'll show you how they knew. Some knew that actually one of their own guys was committing a sexual assault on a child. They didn't reveal it. The PD did not reveal it. Remember, they said if you got a complaint here, you don't report as a crime, you come in and you fill out a complaint. That's what I was told. But the girl had to go to the hospital one day. I think she had a sexually transmitted disease, or maybe not, but she was drunk or whatever. But I think she did have a sexually transmitted disease or something. And they questioned her, how did you get it? But she told the doctors and nurses that she was having sex as a minor with a cop, the CCP cop. Now, that triggered an outside investigation. Well, then did the cops and the CCPD, at that moment, obviously, it would be brought abroad and they would want to weed that out. One of the other cops during the investigation lied to cover up for McChester. And when this came out during the criminal trial and all, he received like 3 days off work, discipline, with or without pay, I don't know. Until this day, he has now risen the ranks. Unless he retired, he rose the ranks in CCP. Someone that actually covered up the sexual assault of a child by a fellow officer, who finally was sent, I believe, he was at the federal courthouse, this is maybe 7 years back, and I think his judge was Judge Janice Ellington. But he was sentenced. McChester was sentenced. But his fellow officer tried to cover it up. And that man is, as far as I know, he's top supervisor at CCPD today. There is none good, no, not one. I remember that case because McChester's parents, black mom and dad, would show up, and they were Christians. I don't know what church they went to or go to in Corpus Christi, but they supported their son. They said he made a mistake, but they loved him. And I was going to try to help the parents and even help McChester, like with a jail ministry thing. I thought, the offer I made, because I tried to contact the lawyer for McChester. I wrote it as something I felt I should do. And finally, they didn't have a phone number, but I had to leave a message somehow. And then I talked to his lawyer on the phone. And he said, what do you want to do? I said, well, I do ministry. I help guys on the streets. And I work with guys that are, have a history of convicts and all. I said, maybe I can help the mom and dad of McChester. If he was in Houston jail, I don't know. I said, maybe I can give him rides, visit their son, something of that nature. And then I thought I'd just become friends with him. Because obviously he's going to do like 7 years in prison or whatever. And then it's going to get out. So I wasn't rejoicing. I sincerely felt I was going to help him. I never wound up doing it, but I did make that offer to help. See, there's none good, no, not one. That's just that's one case now. You say, John, I'm the new commissioner. I was never aware of it. You should. That you can Google that particular case. These came out on rankings where they are rating areas that have corruption with them. And I posted links to that. They had a couple of other things actually with CCPD on that national ranking of like avoid this area. That's exactly what that particular one came out. And it was by lawyers. It was a national record. And they gave a warning to just people in general that looked to areas they're going to live. And they warned them, don't go to Nueces County or Corpus Christi. That was a national lawyer ranking type thing. And they said for those that, most people when they look at going to an area, they look at economics and other things. But for those that look at that, like we want to make sure there's not corruption and all. That's what that ranking was. And I know generally when you look at the well-being of an area, a lot of people don't take that into consideration, but some do. Some do. Elijah said, I see a cloud the size of a man's hand. We just had a hurricane that went up in Louisiana, tropical storm. And now we're having all the signs. If I were to predict, I think this is the year we're going to get hit, okay? If I were to predict it, if I were to prophesy, because one year we had a big one coming in, and I told the story before, but I was in the middle of praying. They had the mandatory evacuation. I wasn't going to leave. All my neighbors were leaving. My family would go out to Nueces Ranch, but I'd just stay in Corpus and video if it can. But I was upset because everybody was, fleeing. And on the tracking, I told this before, but I rebuked it because I got tired of everybody. Oh, aren't you fleeing? Aren't you leaving? I said, no, I'm going to the beach today, which I did because of the waves. And I remember on the tracking, it was heading straight towards us. I rebuked it in prayer because I was like mad that everybody was disrupting the routine. And that day it turned. They report, oh, it made a sharp, unexpected turn. Now maybe other people rebuked it. But I now take that rebuke back. I'm owed one. You see? So I would say this year we're going to get there. Those that trust in this, it's possible this whole city can be underwater. It's possible. It's possible. You see, but my family would go out to the ranch. I would stay at my house. I don't even have home insurance. I do not have home insurance. The house is paid off. The taxes are very high. The taxing in Corpus has gone very high. People are for that. And one of the biggest expenses is public service, is police salaries. The taxes are high to pay for expenses, and that's the biggest expense for just about any municipality, public safety, which are cops and firefighters. And more than likely, the cops are the single biggest budget item in the city of Corpus Christi. And to have these types of rankings that have come out nationally. Now, there were a lot of good young cops that got on that department. But the ones that stayed, rose the ranks. That's the element that was really corrupt for many years. Covered up a lot of stuff. And that's affected our region. That's affected our area. So I would say, yeah, maybe this is the year. And those that have such confidence in their economy and they're going to retire and they're going to live their good lives and all this, everything could be gone permanently. In the 70s, I guess it was Celia, pretty much almost wiped out Corpus Christi. But there are some areas along the coast, and I think the storm I rebuked might have been the Katrina or one of the others. It was a big storm, the one that was heading our way, and I did that little rebuke, and it turned that night. I saw it on the satellite, unexpectedly made a sharp turn. But it either went into the Galveston one or the New Orleans one. I think it was the Galveston hurricane. But some areas, like New Orleans, they rebuilt the levees. But one of the things that they were wrong about was a lot of people from those hurricanes came to Corpus Christi. Some are even used to be, got jobs at the Calder Times, one of the ladies. But what they tried to do is they said, we're going to rebuild. Particularly, they said that about New Orleans, But when a lot of the population left, and then there was this big bang, let's rebuild. A lot of the people didn't want to go back. They simply said, we started over somewhere else. And all of the hopes of like rebuilding everything, parts of it were. But a lot of people, that were living in government housing and all, they said, no, we would never go back there. We're now in other locations, and some still here. And so it's possible that Corpus Christi could be gone next year. It's possible. Meaning it could be a hurricane that be the mother of hurricanes, could wipe out the courthouse. It's possible. Things like that happen. Wipe out the whole city. Mike Granite will stay, and I will stay at the house. I'll videotape. But it's possible that there could be such an economic, natural judgment on Corpus Christi that it would change the history forever. And then the people would rebuild it all. But the whole, and during some of these other hurricanes and places, even the wildfires, when people went back after their cities, neighborhoods were wiped out, they said it wasn't, you remember, like signposts, trees, blocks, but they said all of that was gone. It would be like looking at an open field and saying, I'm home, and they said no, it was gone forever. But all of the things that we put our trust in society, they will be gone forever. You and I will die someday. So put your hope in God. Remember, some of the things that sound to some that might see these for the first time, you say, oh, he's just got to... No, the reason I try to give you some of these national things, and I quote the flash bomb and all, any community leader should be highly aware that there's national media that have criticized policing in our city. So it's not just the ICE raids. The only one that really mentioned, KRS mentioned why we're 10% of all of the ICE raids in our city, throughout the country. That had to do more with corruption, I explained that, than it did with just crime in general. It was Houston has a much higher crime rate, or much higher crime with the population. So these are things that you kind of look at and say, oh, there's more to it here. So there's more to it here. Okay? We'll end with that last one. I see a cloud the size of a man's hand, okay? Let's end with that. That's Elijah when the storm was on the way.